malakas. Ulit.
Game.
Ang bayan ko'y tanging ikaw, Pilipinas kong mahal, ang puso ko at buhay man sa iyong ibibigay. Tungkulin kong nagampanan na lagi kang paglingkuran. Ang laya mo'y mabantayan, Pilipinas kong mahal. Ang bayan ko'y tanging ikaw, Pilipinas kong mahal, ang puso ko at buhay man sa iyong ibibigay. Tungkulin kong nagampanan na lagi kang paglingkuran. Ang laya mo'y mabantayan, Pilipinas kong mahal. Ang bayan ko'y tanging ikaw, Pilipinas kong mahal, ang
So China, you abide with the decision of the UN's arbitrary tribunal. You abide in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. So get out of our West Philippine Sea, China. Get out now and stop reclamation projects and activities, whatever, in our West Philippine Sea. Stop the militarization in our West Philippine Sea. Get out of our sea. Get out of the West Philippine Sea. Get out of our West Philippine Sea. The West Philippine Sea belongs to the Filipino people and the Philippines. Mabuhay ang Pilipinas! Mabuhay ang sambayan ng Pilipino! Fight for our West Philippine Sea! Save our West Philippine Sea!
Ang bayan ko'y tanging ikaw, Pilipinas kong mahal, ang puso ko at buhay man.
The victory of our West Philippine Sea is the victory of every Filipino. So I would like to urge the youth, whether you are in the Philippines or overseas, to join and support our cause for the future of the Philippines and the future generations of the Philippines. Mabuhay ang Pilipinas!
Okay, and good morning, everybody. Good day. Hello, Philippines. Hello, world. And good morning, everybody. And at this juncture, I would like to welcome you to this episode, Season 3, Episode 3 of the West Philippine Sea Catch. It is an online talk show sponsored and hosted by the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea. And this is for the purpose of creating public awareness and to educate the Filipino people and the international community on the issues, breaking news, and current events in the West Philippine Sea. The topic for today's talk show is how to light up the gray zone in the West Philippines. Okay, I am Captain Caruso Mario Antonio Tagal. I am a former military pilot of the Philippine Air Force, and I also retired as an airline pilot for Philippine Airlines. And I am the director for membership of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea. And for the opening remarks, I would like to call on Dr. Celia Lamkin, the founder and global chairperson of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea, and executive producer, director, writer, and host of the West Philippine Sea Catch. Now I'll give the floor to Dr. Celia Lamkin.
Good morning, Captain Tagal, and of course, good morning, everyone. And thank you so much for that kind introduction, Captain Tagal. Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome all the guests, participants from the different parts of the world, where many countries are actually represented. And we would like to welcome some diplomats of the Department of Foreign Affairs, overseas Filipinos, students, teachers, professors, IT specialists, lawyers, civic organizations, business executives, friends from all walks of life, and we have some representative from some government agencies. Of course, we have our media friends I can see now from ABS-CBN and other media networks, and our global citizens. Now, before we proceed to the main segment of this event, I would like to read the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea disclaimer. Any views, opinions, comments, or presentation of facts of the guest speakers, panelists, guests, attendees, and netizens are personal, and they do not necessarily reflect the stand and opinions of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea, nor the organizations they are affiliated with. Now, let us put our right hand over left chest for the Philippine national anthem, Lupang Hinirang.
Bayang magiliw, perlas ng silanganan, alab ng puso, sa dibdib mo'y buhay. Lupang hinirang, tuyang ka ng magiting, sa manlulupi, di ka pasisiin, sa dagat at bundok, sa simoy at sa langit mong buhay. Ang tulat, awit sa paglaya minamahal, ang watawat mo'y tagumpay na nagniningning. Ang bituin at araw na'y kailan pa may di magdidilim. Lupa ng araw ng walhati pagsinta, buhay ay langit sa piling mo. Aming ligaya na pag may mag-aapi, ang mamatay ng dahil sa'yo.
Thank you very much to the Band of Brothers for that very nationalistic song. And I would like to call again Dr. Lampkin to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you so much, Captain Tata. Our guest speaker for tonight is Colonel Raymond Powell, who concluded a 35-year career in the United States Air Force in November 2021. After enlisting in 1986, he was trained as a Vietnamese linguist, then served tours in the Philippines and Hawaii before receiving his commission in 1993 through Officer Training School. He went on to serve on various operations management and cyber communications roles. Colonel Powell commanded the Air Force Honor Guard in Washington, D.C. from 2009 to 2011, then entered training to become Foreign Area Officer. He served as the Air Attaché to Vietnam from 2013 to 2016, and the Senior Defense Official, Defense Attaché to Australia from 2017 to 2020. His other assignments have included Japan, Germany, 2 tours in Qatar, and 3 in the Pentagon. He was also deployed to combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. He received his bachelor's degree from Wayland Baptist University in 1992 and his master's from Central Michigan University in 1999. He is a 2021 fellow at the Distinguished Careers Institute at Stanford University in California, USA. Colonel Ray Powell leads Project Mioshu at the Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation at Stanford University, California, USA. His project seeks to illuminate the maritime gray zone so as to hold China and other malign actors accountable for their coercive and illegal activities. Ladies and gentlemen, live from Stanford, California, USA, it is a great honor and pleasure to present to you our guest speaker, Colonel Ray Powell. Good evening, Colonel Powell.
Good evening, Celia. How are you? You remembered it was evening here.
Yes, yeah, good evening. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us today, of course, in the Philippines and other parts of, of the world. So, Colonel Powell, I would like to, I would like to ask this question first before you can start with your presentation. What is Project Myoshu at the Gordon Nutt Center for National Security Innovation at Stanford University, and when did this project start? Colonel, thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, those are great opening questions and very interesting. So I was in that fellowship that you spoke of and came in contact with the Gordian Knot Center during my time there and became very interested in what they were doing. And what the Gordian Knot Center does, and what they've done for many years, is to run a program at Stanford called Hacking for Defense, which has become very well known in the United States. And the idea is to give groups of students at Stanford University real world defense and security problems to work on, and give them 10 weeks during their term to come up with solutions. But they are supposed to use a very entrepreneurial approach. So it involves a lot of stakeholder discovery. They have to have 10 interviews a week. They keep very good notes. And many of them have gone on to great success. Actually, some have left here and started up new companies in the defense and security space. Some have launched major projects. And the idea is that in the government bureaucracy, one thing that we don't do terribly well is to innovate, I'm afraid. And so what they find is that the injection of these outside ideas through these entrepreneurial methods can be very effective in bringing in new ideas and new methods. So I went to them. Now, I, of course, am not a normal Stanford student. I was a fellow. But I said, look, I'm very interested in your program here. And I wonder, I have a fascination with the entire security problem, which is the South China Sea. And so we went through the possibilities, and they invited me to come and work on this project with them. And so we used the same method, and it involved scoping down the problem until we came up with something that we thought we could try to solve, and that we thought the solution was in a new area that nobody was really working in. And so that was the genesis. So that was Project Myoshu. And there are about 12 of us now working on this project from many different walks of life. The result has been this idea behind me that you can see on my screen called Sea Light. And it's the idea of lighting up the maritime gray zone, as we've discussed. So that started in July of last year, and I'll catch you up on where we are once I get into my slides.
All right. Thank you so much, Colonel Powell, for a brief history of your project. And I'm sure, and I really appreciate on how your project would really help for some issues of the West Philippines Sea right now. I know this is very important. Okay, Colonel, you may start your presentation now, please. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Okay, hopefully everyone can see, wait a minute, my screen. All right, so you should be able to see a big blue screen that says Sea Light on it. Can you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Yes, you can see, Colonel.
Okay, and so this is our project. We're looking at ways to light up what's called the maritime gray zone. And I want to talk a little bit to begin with on this concept of a gray zone and what is a gray zone. And to illustrate, I'm going to reach to a very familiar recent news event. As you may be aware, there was a big balloon over the United States this past week. And that really was a gray zone operation by China against America. And so what do we mean when we say a gray zone? Well, first of all, a gray zone involves activities that are opaque or sort of gray, hard to sort of pin down by nature. And so in the case of the balloon, it's flying very high in the sky. It's not normally seen by human eyes. It's going through very unpopulated areas. And that brings us to sort of the second idea behind a gray zone is it's very deniable. And the cartoon here indicates that, of course, at the beginning, China tried to tell us that it was actually just a weather balloon. And so there's always an element of deniability. It doesn't really have to be that plausible. It just needs to sort of fit their narrative. And ultimately, gray zone operations, many of them will send a message. And the message to the United States, I believe in this case, was that, we're going to do this, and there really isn't very much you're going to do about it. And of course, this happened right before a major trip by the Secretary of State, who was supposed to go to Beijing and work on repairing the relationship. And so when the balloon first appeared over US territory, there was not instantly news coming out of the US government about this. Instead, it was exposed by the media. There was a photographer for a local newspaper in a city in Montana who had a long lens camera and took a picture of it. And all of a sudden, it made the national news. And that elicited a very strong response from the United States public. And we don't really know what our government would have done had the public not been informed. But because the public was informed, we do know what happened. Of course, the balloon was shot down over the Atlantic Ocean. The Secretary of State's visit was canceled. We know that we can see just by the reaction among the American people that it's increased the American people's resilience and sort of determination not to be taken advantage of in this way. And when I made this slide, I said it was a deterrent to future surveillance. Of course, there's news up in the last couple hours that something else was shot down over Alaska, so maybe it hasn't deterred everything yet. But ultimately, if you shoot things down that come over your country, then they will stop coming. So I think this is a very good example of what we mean when we talk about the gray zone. But of course, in the West Philippine Sea, we're talking about a different kind of gray zone. We're talking about the maritime gray zone. And so in this space where very little information is sort of available to the public, what we find is that bad actors and bullies like China thrive. They thrive because they can be opaque. Nobody knows what they're doing unless somebody tells them. Their actions are deniable. They can claim that other things are happening. And they often are sending a message. They're telling their neighbors, like the Philippines, that we own this space. I don't care what the United Nations Tribunal said. I don't care. When everybody else goes away, we are still here, and we will control who comes in and out. And so our project is based on the idea that exposure, like with the balloon, exposure is the key to deterring China, deterring other bad actors, and building national resilience against those actions. Now, in order to expose them, we need to get the information out into the public. And just like with the United States government, the Philippine government and every other government in the world is bad at releasing information. I have worked for the United States government for 35 years of my life, and I can tell you it is very hard for governments to decide to release information. This can be because they think it's a secret. It can be because they think it might make them look bad. It can be for political or geopolitical reasons. It can just be for bureaucratic reasons. It's easier to hold information than it is to release it, and usually takes a lot of people to decide to release it. So our entire project is based on the idea that we need to figure out a way to get information about what's happening in the West Philippine Sea out into the public space without relying on the governments to give it to us. And so our solution is essentially, what we're calling Sea Light is essentially to have ourselves or an entity in the middle of these new technologies and these new data providers on the commercial side who are giving us lots of information that didn't used to be available to people outside of government. And then connecting that with advocacy groups such as yours, the involved public, research centers and journalists, and even government agencies sometimes, because we are actually, for the most part, on the same side. It's just that our independent and entity is able to be much more nimble than a government in all cases, because we don't suffer from the same bureaucratic and political pressures that governments do. And so having these independent collectors and analysts who expose that illegal and coercive behavior using this new technology and this new data, and then connecting it to these advocacy groups, the involved public, is the focus of our project. So from July through the end of last year, we worked very hard on this project and came up with the concept. And then we've had an opportunity in early January, courtesy of the Strat-based ADR Institute in Manila, to present some information about our project to their conference, which was held virtual, or it was held in person, but I appeared virtually. And as part of, and I essentially presented what the scope of our project is and what we were trying to do. And as a part of that, I was able to talk about some information that I was able to glean from some of these commercially available tools about a confrontation that happened between the BRP Andres Bonifacio and a Chinese Coast Guard ship near Panatag Shoal. This was actually a pretty straightforward presentation. It wasn't very controversial insofar as what happened was really clear just from the evidence. That what it appeared is that the Andres Bonifacio went out to essentially show the flag. And because China has controlled Panatag Shoal for so long, it's important that the Philippines goes out from time to time and reminds China that the Philippines has not given up on its claim to the shoal. And so I believe that's exactly what the Andres Bonifacio was doing, and I applaud them for it. And so, of course, when they get out there, the Chinese Coast Guard ship intercepted them. They were paralleled for a little while, came within about 800 meters, and the Bonifacio then returned to the mainland. Because this was the first that people had heard about this became national news in the Philippines over the next 24 hours. And we looked at this as an important proof of concept, that we really do have something here that by connecting these commercially available information to the public, we actually are filling a real need. So we then tried something different later in January, which was we tried to see how it would work in Malaysia. And this was actually even simpler in a lot of ways. All we did was I issued a tweet over Twitter and said that a Malaysian Navy ship, the KD Kelantan, had shown up at this place where this Chinese Coast Guard ship was always on patrol in their exclusive economic zone off of a place called Luconia Shoals. So I just put out this tweet, and it was a very simple tweet, but it was picked up by a newspaper called Defense Security Asia, which isn't a major newspaper in Malaysia, but that was also sort of echoed then across some other news sites in Malaysia. Later that day, or actually I believe the next day, the Minister of Defense was asked about this activity, and his his answer seemed to many in Malaysia to be unsatisfying, that it seemed not to take a very strong stance on Malaysia's rights in its own exclusive economic zone. And so after some degree of uproar over this, eventually you'll see down in the lower right-hand corner that the Defense Ministry clarified their stance to say very clearly that the Luconia Shoals, you see the Malaysian translation there, belongs to Malaysia. And again, we think that this is an important step in building resilience, to be able to help, frankly, governments and government officials to clarify their stance so that China does not believe that it is winning simply by pushing hard. Then just over a week ago, we had an interesting little event where the Andres Bonifacio again went out into the West Philippine Sea and encountered several Chinese ships along the way. Now, I went through and I tweeted out a whole series of tweets about this event as it passed by a couple of maritime militia ships, one very closely, and then later in its trip passed very closely to a Chinese Coast Guard ship, and then finally the other Chinese Coast Guard ship sort of followed its path from a distance. And so I characterized this as sort of they were monitoring it. They were sort of shadowing the Andres Bonifacio, and that made some news here. But there was a little bit of a pushback coming from the government in this case. And first, the Philippine Coast Guard said that after sort of giving it credence, later came back and said it was unverified. And I think in their case, it was just a case of them, remembering that it was a Navy ship they're talking about, and the Coast Guard, it was out of place for them to talk about it. So they decided that they really shouldn't have said anything at all. But then after that, the AFP came out and said that there's no information that the Chinese vessels stalked the ship. Now, stalk is kind of a funny word, but fair enough. I think that there are different ways to look at the data. What I would say about this is that if the Chinese Maritime Militia and Coast Guard did not intend to come very close to the Andres Bonifacio on its journey, it sure had very, very convenient timing for when it decided to make certain movements. And some of their routes look very much like they wanted to sort of see what the Andres Bonifacio was up to. So I don't know. I mean, I can't prove that they were shadowing it intentionally, but it certainly seems interesting to me the number of times that the Bonifacio ran into Chinese ships on its journey. And then just a few days ago, BRP Malapascua from the Coast Guard was out on a patrol and had a very interesting set of encounters. It was coming back from Pagas Island, and it appeared to be headed directly toward Palawan. But at the same time that was happening, one of the Chinese Coast Guard ships left Mischief Reef, went to a place that was right along the path of the Malapascua, and then disappeared off of its automated information system transponder. So it basically turned off the thing that we use to tell where it is. And so that seemed very interesting. And so I was watching it closely and noticed that as it came up alongside Sabina Shoal, the Malapascua essentially stopped and stayed there for 8 hours. And so I became very concerned at that point that there was something going on, and had got some information from other sources suggesting that there had been challenges to the Malapascua. But eventually I put it together as sort of a preponderance of the evidence suggesting that the Malapascua had been stopped and harassed by the Chinese Coast Guard ship 5205. What finally sold me on the idea was, as the Malapascua went back to the west and then to the north, that all of a sudden the same Chinese Coast Guard ship reappeared off of its, turned its AIS back on and sailed back into Mischief Reef. So it was out there doing something. Of course, again, I was not on the Malapascua. I don't have access to radio communications. I don't know exactly what took place. And unfortunately, we are not yet at the point with overhead satellite imagery where we can reliably take pictures of things and prove where everyone was. There is an alternate theory as to what happened here, and I think it's not a bad one. It is possible that when this happened, actually what was going on was there was a resupply mission to Ayungin Shoal, Second Thomas Shoal, carried out by the Philippine Coast Guard, and that the Malapascua was there in support. Its path from the place where it stopped to the west and then breaking off to the north would be consistent with that kind of an event. So it's also possible that that is what happened. So all of this is to say, you know, I came out of this experience with both the previous one with the Andres Bonifacio and this one less sure that I should be doing the sort of the live tweeting about these events that I've been experimenting with over the last couple of weeks, and thinking that probably it's better if I take a more deliberate approach to coming to conclusions about these things. But what is clear is that there have been an awful lot of encounters between the Chinese Coast Guard and Maritime Militia and the Philippine Navy and Coast Guard over the last few weeks. In fact, I think some of that has to do with the fact that both have been very busy over the last couple of weeks. So as you can see on the left side, Philippine Navy and Coast Guard have, between the Andres Bonifacio, the Malapascua, and the Teresa Magbanwa, have spent quite a bit of time in the Spratly Archipelago in the first 10 days of February. And this is after, basically in all of December and January, we have no record of Philippine Navy and Coast Guard activity in the Spratly Archipelago. So certainly there has been an uptick in Philippine security vessels in the Spratly Archipelago. And at the same time, for whatever reason, China decided that this would be a good time to have 3 Coast Guard vessels in the area of Mischief Reef and Ayungin Shoal. And this is very unusual. Usually they have 1. Sometimes they'll have 2 if they're sort of in the middle of a change out, but 3 is a big number. It's hard not to wonder whether this had something to do with the visit of the US Defense Secretary at the beginning of the month, which was, of course, 31st of January to 2 February. But that's speculation on my part. But what this tells you is, certainly if nothing else, there were many opportunities for the Philippine Coast Guard and Navy and the China Coast Guard and Maritime Militia to encounter one another in this space. And I'll let you know that you can be proud of the Andres Bonifacio, because for the last couple of days, it's been out at Pagasa Island. You can see in this picture up in the upper right-hand side, you can see the Andres Bonifacio's track over the last day or so. 3 of the visible Chinese maritime militia ships that we can see on AIS. As anyone who's familiar with this area knows, there's usually many, many more Chinese ships that you can't see because they have their AIS either turned off or they're using a kind of AIS that you can't see from satellites. And then on the upper left-hand corner, you can see a picture from a service called Planet, which is a commercial overhead imagery service. And the Andres Bonifacio is clearly seen to the south of Pagasa Island there. And then, of course, down in the lower left is a reminder of how close the Chinese base at Subi Reef is. Of course, this is a full base with port and airstrip. So the people at Pagasa are in constant sort of living in the shadow of this large Chinese base. So what I'm hoping you'll take away from this, and what the conversation I'd love to have with you as we come into the discussion, is first that our whole project is based on the idea that an engaged public is the key to deterring China and building our national resilience against China's coercion. That there is an increasing quantity and quality of information that is available to us through commercial sources, and the cost of it are starting to come down. And so we should be able to get more and more information out to the public, which will help with this process. And what eventually we're hoping to build is a whole cadre of independent, open source collectors and analysts who can get this information, process it, understand it, interpret it, and put it out to the public so that people are aware. And again, this will help them, just as the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea is trying to do, educate the public and increase their resilience. And that is my final slide, and I will let you, if you need to take a look at it. That is my email address. You are free to contact me. And there, that is the website for Project Mushu and the here at the Gordian Knot Center for National Security Innovation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colonel Powell, for that excellent presentation and facts, and of course some data they have given to us, and your insights. By the way, Colonel and all the participants, we will be getting questions from the 5 panelists of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea, and after that, we will be entertaining the questions from the Zoom participants as well as from the netizens who are watching us live at the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea FB page. Now, I would like to call now, joining us live from Villamor Air Base, Pasay City, Philippines, is a video content editor and creator, and she is the Assistant Multimedia Officer of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea. Let's all welcome Miss Maria Villa Clarissa Tagal. Good morning, Ma'am Villa. Is Ma'am Villa there? JR, can you please?
Unmute.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. It's a nice morning. Hello, good morning, Colonel Powell.
Good morning.
I have a question for you over here. Colonel Powell, what is the significance of your project in the national security of the Philippines, especially in the West Philippine Sea?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I really believe that we are in a long struggle against China's gray zone tactics to essentially exert control over everything that within its claimed territory, within its claimed sovereignty, which of course includes large parts of the Philippines' exclusive economic zone. And it's not going to be something that you undo quickly. It's going to involve a lot of capacity building, where the Philippines builds up its maritime capacity so that it can more effectively push back. And it will also, and that's going to involve resources. It will involve money. It will involve help from the United States, of course, which Secretary Austin was here or was there in early February to pledge. But ultimately, there's also sort of a narrative war or an information war going on, in which China seeks to convince the world that this is already done, that China already owns this, and that it's sort of useless to push back. And the thing to do is to realize that when you're fighting in the space of information, that your best weapon is more information and better information. And so one thing that China seeks to do, because again, we're dealing with this gray zone, is it hopes that nobody will notice most of the things that happen. And so one of the best things that can happen is that people notice, is that they hold their leaders accountable. And as many of you are aware, there was a desire on the part of the previous administration in the Philippines to make a deal with China, but it was a deal that in the end involved a surrender of a lot of these a lot of Philippine rights to its to the West Philippine Sea. And in the end, I believe that between China's pushiness and the will of the Filipino people, that administration decided that was not tenable any longer. And so you saw even before the end of the Duterte administration, they were changing their minds and they were saying, maybe this is not going to work out. And then you see with the new administration, they've become pretty, you know, they've put out some pretty strong statements on the Philippines' rights to the West Philippine Sea. So again, I come back to the idea that, you know, information is the way to fight in an information war. And that is what we're hoping to provide is good, credible, useful information for pushing back against China.
Thank you very much po,
You're
Colonel
welcome.
Powell. Have a nice day po.
You too.
Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you so
Salamat po.
much, Ma'am Via, and of course, Colonel Powell, for that, for that excellent explanation about the importance of your project to our national security in the West Philippine Sea. And now I may
Salamat.
recall all right, so we have live from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, we have Mr. Geraldo Estella Jr. He's an IT specialist and a programmer and a software engineer, and he is also the Deputy Global Multimedia Head and the Country Chairperson of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea, Malaysia Chapter. Good morning, Sir JR.
Good morning, Doctora. Good morning,
Yes,
Colonel Powell. I mean, good evening to you.
Indeed, indeed.
Thank you for that excellent presentation you just made. It made things clearer, and we see a better picture of what's really happening currently in our West Philippine Sea. So, with that said, my question is, given the many gray zone tactics and bullying of China in the West Philippine Sea, like what you said, what can our government do? What can the Philippine government do about this? Thank you.
Yeah. So I think that, thank you very much. It's a very good question. I think, you know, and again, I understand that as an American, I'll come across as a bit biased on this, but I do think that the decision of the Marcos administration to improve and expand its defense relationship with the United States was a very smart move. The United States obviously has a lot that we can offer in terms of building capacity. And also, I was very interested and excited by the decision to resume joint patrols. So I'll be very excited to see what form that takes and what kind of message that succeeds in sending to our friend China. I also think that so this is where it gets a little difficult, and truly as a former government official myself, I sympathize with government officials who are unsure of how to release information. And I will tell you that when I was at working in embassies, we used to beg people who came from some of our national agencies out to Vietnam or Australia, please declassify and release more information about these gray zone tactics, because the people need to know what's happening. And it's just really hard for governments to do that. But I do think it's worth the Philippine government taking a hard look at how it releases information and what information it releases. The things that I put out on Twitter or in forums like this are the best that I can figure out looking at the information that I have. I fully accept that the Philippine government will have better information in many cases, and maybe in most cases. And I would love to hear better explanations for what indeed does happen in the West Philippine Sea. And I know that there are difficulties in that. There are geopolitical difficulties, right? You're concerned that China will punish you in some way if you say too much. There are also political difficulties. If the government puts out information and says that these bad things are happening, they could be concerned that the Filipino people will say, well, what are you doing about it? Right? And that the Filipino people will get frustrated that why are all these things happening and what is the government doing? I am not critical of how the government is handling its military or its Coast Guard affairs. I think that it's doing the best that it can with the assets that it has. I would like to see the security assets of the Philippines expand much more quickly than they have in the past. I would like to see more resources put toward maritime security. And I would like to see the United States help with that even more than it has. But ultimately, I think that for the good of the Philippines and the West Philippine Sea, it is important to continue to put as much information as possible about China's tactics out into the public space, because that's where you will have the resolve, you will build the resolve to actually do more, right? So if the government has to decide today, do I spend this money on another Coast Guard ship, or do I use it to help, with this domestic program? Well, that's a hard decision for a government. People will usually want the domestic program. They will want something that will help their bottom line, their economic situation, their local situation. It's hard for a government to decide to spend money on foreign affairs and defense, or security and defense. But if you put out the good information about what's actually happening in the West Philippine Sea, you'll find that people will say, you know what, actually it is important that you spend that money on defense, and that makes it easier to do. So I would just encourage, the Philippine government, who I am on their side. I want them to succeed, and I think that information can be their friend.
Thank you for that wonderful answer, Colonel Powell.
Right. Thank you so much, Chair, for that excellent question, and of course, Colonel Powell, for that very excellent insights. And you are right, that we want this administration, the Philippine government, to succeed in to have more how to call that, for our maritime security, and of course our national security to be more successful with regard to the issues in the West Philippine Sea. Thank you again. Now joining us live for our next panelist, joining us live from Villamor Air Base, Pasay City, Philippines, as you have heard him earlier, is Captain Caruso Mario Antonio Tagal. Of course, again, I will mention, he's a former military pilot of the Philippine Air Force and a retired airline pilot of the Philippine Airlines, and he's our director of membership of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea. Good morning, Captain Tagal, again.
And good morning, Dr. Lampkin. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And my question to Colonel Ray Powell is this: what are the ways or means that the Philippine government should implement in order to block the China's Coast Guard law and China's maritime safety law that is being implemented by China in the West Philippine Sea?
Well, first of all, thank you, and go Air Force.
Yeah.
So, I of course, our project is focused very much, as I've said before, on this information space, and I do think that ultimately it is an information war that we're talking about. And so, the entire world, virtually the entire world, agrees with the Philippines, or agreed with the Philippines in putting in its arbitral tribunal case. Where we were excited about the outcome. We believe that the outcome is just and right and says the correct things, that the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines is the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines, and that China's historic rights, as it calls them, is essentially, the arbitral tribunal is very clear. It essentially declared the historic rights claim of China for the entire 9-dash line to be without merit. And so the Philippines has already done the world in a tremendous service. Now, the Philippines, wasn't doing it for the world, it was doing it for the Philippines, but the world is grateful. And the Philippines, I think, probably suffered some for it. right? Because China was very unhappy with the entire process. And so, again, I think that the Philippines deserves tremendous credit for what it has already done. And in an information war, it's important that, you know, we retain the high ground. And the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea, which China signed in 1996, they agreed to it, dictates who owns what in the West Philippine Sea. And it is extremely clear that everything in the Philippines exclusive economic zone is the Philippines' resources to control. So again, I just want to emphasize that the Philippines has already done quite a bit. I think that there was an unfortunate era in which, you know, again, this is under the previous administration, and I'm not trying to be political here, I'm not trying to be critical, but it was a step back to sort of step away from the victory that the Philippines won in 2016 with the arbitral tribunal case. But I think it's really important that really smart and focused voices from the Philippines continue to bring this up. You know, of course, Justice Carpio is his presentation on the Philippine sovereign rights in the West Philippine Sea is incredible, and it should be it should be seen by everyone. Frankly, it is one of the best produced explanations or expositions of a complicated topic that I have ever seen. You know, just between the way he explains it and the way that the video is produced is remarkable. And we certainly need more people like that. You know, mostly again, I think it is incumbent on all of us to find more ways to connect what is happening in the West Philippine Sea back to the Philippine people. And for that, I give the National Youth Movement all the credit in the world for what you're doing.
Thank you very much, Colonel Ray Powell. And may I add just a background there. I was a former military pilot for the Philippine Air Force, and in the early 80s, we flew persuasion flights near Pagasa Islands. And all that we know of, the two protagonists are Vietnam and the Philippines. And China was not even a main character then. And China became emboldened when the US bases was terminated in the Philippines.
Well,
So-
I will say I was there at the end. I was at Clark Air Base when Mount Pinatubo erupted, so I remember it well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just an addendum for info only. Thank you, Colonel Ray.
Sure.
All right. Thank you so much, Captain Tagal, and of course, and Colonel Powell for that very, I would say, enlightening information and some experience of Captain Tagal during the time when he was in the Philippine Air Force flying over the Calayan Islands. All right, so now joining us live from San Francisco, California, USA, is Engineer Rad Barrientos. He's an aeronautical engineer and a licensed flight operations officer, aircraft dispatcher of the Philippine US in the airline industry for 18 years. And he is also a licensed general building contractor in California, USA. And he is the state chairperson of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea, California, USA chapter. I would say, of course, good evening there, Engineer Rad.
Good evening, Dr. Celia. Thank you for that kind introduction. And of course, good evening to Colonel Raymond Powell. I was really amazed with all the presentations you did today, and we learned more about what's going on with our West Philippine Sea. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So without further ado, I'd like to ask you my question. Actually, I have more, but I'd like to be specific with one. With the developments of EDCA, or the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, where 4 more bases will be added. Would you recommend to have such base to be located in Pag-asa Island or Tito Island in the Kalayaan Island group, or do you have anything in mind? Can you tell us about it?
Yeah, I can. So Ray Powell sitting here in Stanford would think that would be great. But I think realistically, that's not going to happen. And I'll explain why. The thing about Pag-asa is it is outside of the Philippines exclusive economic zone. And so, as you might be aware, the evolution of claims in the entirety of the South China Sea is really complex, and as has been discussed before, for a long time, exclusive economic zones weren't really a thought, right? I mean, this was sort of before a lot of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea things became very important. But for a long time, it was about, Vietnam had this one, and the Philippines had this one, and China had this one, and Taiwan had this one, Malaysia had that one, So the way that the United States dealt with that for decades was to say, we don't take a position on any of this stuff. All we want is for everything to stay as it is, right? Just don't go kick anybody else off of their island, right? Or their feature. And that seemed to work for a very long time, until what has happened recently is this push by China into, very aggressively into the exclusive economic zones of its neighbors. So while I do think there's a lot of promise for the joint patrols and other things, I think for the United States to actively sort of give its weight behind one claim, even if it is our ally, our sole ally in this whole discussion, to give its weight behind one claim when for decades it said we don't take a position on claims, I think would probably be a very tall hill for us to climb, at least as things stand today. Now, if things were to deteriorate further and the United States was sort of forced to reconsider its past positions, perhaps that would be a possibility. But I think that just sort of in the arc of how the international law discussion has gone up until now, I think it'd be very hard for the US to sort of do that, just because we would be afraid that we'd sort of upset the apple cart of everything stay as it is, by us sort of giving our weight to the one claim, if that makes sense.
But Colonel, let's not forget China already did their own thing too, as well.
I am with you. And I was in Vietnam when the island building campaign really took off. And I think the Vietnamese were staring at us like, what are you going to do about this? And truly, I don't think we had a very good answer, right? I think that the US policy vis-a-vis that campaign was a failure. We simply did not take a strong enough position. And I think, so, this goes back again, decades. And understanding the US relationship with China, you really have to go back to the Cold War and understand, the whole early 70s, Nixon goes to China and kind of pulls China away from the Soviets. We were fighting a different war at the time. It was the Cold War, it was the USSR, and getting China sort of pulled away from Russia was the entire thing. And for decades after that, there was a deep belief in the US, a wrong belief, it turns out, that with enough time and enough capitalism that China would eventually just sort of join the community of nations and would become what we used to call a responsible stakeholder in the world community. And that illusion died a very hard death starting about 10 years ago, maybe a little, it really was Xi Jinping coming on board. And it was really our wake-up call. So, yes, I agree. I truly wish we had handled that much, much more strongly and better. We can't undo it. We're going to have to learn how to, sort of start from where we are. I'm not telling you what I think. Again, if it were up to Ray Powell, I'd really be tempted to go out and make that an EDCA site. But I don't think it's up to me, and I don't think it's something that's realistically going to happen, at least not very soon.
Colonel Power, excuse me. Okay, let me get back to what I have in mind. Let's not forget the Kalayaan or the Pag-asa Island, the group of islands there, is part of our of one of our provinces, which is Palawan. Okay, and let's not forget we have civilian population in that island. This is not purely just military posts by the Philippines, and we have occupied that island, or we own that island, which is part of our map as well. Okay, long before we have claims or China had claims to this one. And if I may emphasize, the illegal assertion of having that 9-dash line of China is actually, rooted out of the of a mistake, out of making their own map to begin with. I mean,
Yes,
it's
indeed.
not their map is basically not in any of the world maps that this non-dash line that we are talking about. So having
Yeah.
said that, we have civilian population there. It's one of our barangay. It's one of our part of our provinces. So in the essence, the EEC has extended to Pag-asa Island.
So that's where. So let me say two things about that. One is, in the case of the EEZ, that's where the arbitral tribunal ruling is not your friend. Because one thing that the arbitral tribunal decided was that none of the islands or features in the Spratly Archipelago qualifies as an official island. So, and the reason that matters is that islands get an exclusive economic zone of their own. But the arbitral tribunal decided that, and what makes an island under their definition is that it can sustain life essentially without outside help. So in other words, that life could exist naturally there with nothing coming from the outside. And the arbitral tribunal decided that none of the Spratly Islands had that capability. In terms, what I will say about the civilian population, and really, frankly, the military population at Pag-asa, they are covered under the Mutual Defense Treaty with the United States. And so were there to be an attack on Pag-asa, that would invoke the United States, the Mutual Defense Treaty with the United States, because it is the people and the military assets of the Philippines that invokes the treaty. So although I don't see it becoming an EDCA site, certainly they are covered under the Mutual Defense Treaty. And I think that the United States is much more awake to that than it has been in the past.
All right.
Thank you, Colonel.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Engineer Rad and Colonel Powell. Now, Colonel Powell, I have my question. Before we will go to the open forum, and the floor will be open to all our Zoom participants of their questions, and also our netizens are watching. I would like to ask this question. Last week, maybe Sir JR, can you please show the picture, please, Sir JR? All right. Okay. Last week, from this aerial view, I would say, there were 2 Philippine Coast Guard in Pag-asa Island. That's the Pag-asa Island or the Tito Island, right? In the Calayan Island group. If I'm not mistaken, of course, I'm not gonna mention the name of this Philippine Coast Guard right there. Okay, so that's very clear. And before February 6, those 2 Philippine Coast Guards were there. Now, on February 6, I would say I learned that these 2 Philippine Coast Guards left Pag-asa Island. Sir JR, please kindly show the video. is the Pag-asa Island. And you can see this is the Roncudo airstrip right there. The Roncudo airstrip in Pag-asa Island, there in Kalayaan Islands. And as you can see, I've been counting the Chinese Coast Guards, maybe about 30 of them. This video was taken after the 2 Philippine Coast Guards left the Pag-asa Island, the one that I showed earlier. And, you know, for the protection of whoever sent this to me, of course, I'm not going to mention, but look at my question to you, Colonel Powell. Okay, we know for a fact, we have documented a lot of Chinese Coast Guard and vessels in Pag-asa Island, even way back in 2021. All right, this was taken on February 6th. This was on Monday, that right after the 2 Philippine Coast Guards left Pag-asa Island. My question, in your opinion, Colonel Powell, why such scenario has been happening in Pag-asa Island or the rest of Kalayaan Island? And my, I would say another one is China. Okay, maybe you can answer my question first. I would have a follow-up question, Colonel. Thank you so much.
So let me start with this. So yeah, I was aware of the two ships. In fact, I think that the first picture you showed was one of my tweets.
Yes.
And I was pleased to see them there because it is very important that the Philippine Coast Guard and the Philippine Navy are out there frequently to remind the Chinese that the Philippines remains committed to the security of Pag-asa Island. Secondly, I think it would be very helpful to be able to get better imagery of what exactly happens at Pag-asa Island. It's hard to get satellite imagery. One of the reasons why is because, well, satellites go over at certain times of the day. Sometimes ships know when they go over and they move. And then weather always plays a factor. One of the things that I know that my friend Greg Poling at the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative has said is what's really helpful has been the times that the Philippine Coast Guard has gone out and taken pictures. So to the extent to which the Philippine Coast Guard can do more of that and put that into the public space, that is hugely helpful to getting this larger community of institutions and centers and basically the civil society to be able, so again, I have to give Greg Poling and the Asian Maritime Transparency Initiative all the credit in the world. They are truly the gold standard when it comes to maritime transparency and doing the deep research in figuring out who's what. So for example, that picture you showed me, probably most of those ships are maritime militia. Some of them could actually be fishing, who knows? But if we had like high quality photographs of those, then we could really begin the process of documenting what the Chinese are doing with a high degree of fidelity. The last time this happened was at Whitsun Reef in 2021, when the Philippine Coast Guard went out with cameras and they published the pictures. And it was from an open source intelligence perspective, it was a great day for everybody who does that, right? Because it allowed them to begin to put more and more detail as to exactly what China is doing. So, I would just encourage, if you have contacts in the Philippine Coast Guard, those pictures are gold. And when they are out there, I know, again, I'm a former military guy. I get it. You are afraid to have your people out there taking their own pictures because then that's not, nobody has approved those for release and you're afraid of what will happen. But the senior leadership of the Philippine Navy and the Philippine Coast Guard can make the decision to bring cameras out. Somebody at Pag-asa with, official sanction and a very long lens camera could probably tell us what most of those ships are. and then they're telling the world. Or you had two Coast Guard ships sitting actually much closer than at Pagasa. You know, if somebody could have done that, I just think this would be so valuable. So I really think that would be a huge step in the right direction. The Philippines is not going to be able to match China ship for ship, for sure, at Pagasa Island, right? China just has too many ships, and even the United States. I mean, we have a lot of ships, but they're spread out over the world, right? And so China is able to sort of dominate a space just by being there. And so that's why I keep coming back to this realm of information. China needs to pay a reputational cost for what it's doing. So China loves to go to international forums and say, China believes in win-win. You know, China believes in you know, Asia for the Asians, right? What they mean is Asia for China. That's what they mean. And by showing the kinds of intimidation that happen at a place like Pagasa Island, you put the lie to that line and you start to win that narrative war that is so important. Because again, we need to continue to make China think twice about what it's doing so that we have time to continue to build up the Philippines' maritime security capacity so that the Philippines can begin to stand on its own and stand up to China.
All right, thank you so much, Colonel Powell. Actually, this is not the first video that we have gotten, you know, documented the presence of Chinese Coast Guard. It's been about 3 years, where we had, of course, you know, seen it's a Chinese Coast Guard. It's not only the Chinese militia vessels or something. Before it was only like about 25 or 20. It won't be less than 20. And at this time, I was counting it's about 30 or 35. All right, thank you so much. And of course, this was confirmed by some of the residents in Pagasa Island. The moment they wake up in the morning, they don't need a telescope. They can just see in their, you know, with their own eyes, you know, those Chinese Coast Guard and Chinese maybe militia vessels, they are lining up about 2 to 3 nautical miles. And even in the past, I asked Captain Carl Schuster, he's a former director of the operations, of course, director of operations of the Joint Intelligence Center in the Pacific Command in Hawaii, and he analyzed the distance of those Chinese vessels from the shore of Pagasa Island. So, and also, of course, we had a picture of the Chinese Coast Guard and number. So I'm just giving this information. Now, thank you so much for those, I would say, excellent insights, Colonel Powell. I would like to ask this question again. China loves, since we're talking about gray zone tactics right here, China loves and enjoys using water cannons to our military and fishermen as one of the gray zone tactics in the West Philippine Sea. And this has been documented many times. It has been, of course, published by our main, I would say, media networks. And and of course, I'm sure, of course, China knows that under the Mutual Defense Treaty of the Philippines and USA in 1951, this MDT will not kick in because, you know, it says in the MDT or the Mutual Defense Treaty that it has to be an armed conflict. And what China is using is a water cannon. So, I mean, in this regard, would you recommend to amend the Mutual Defense Treaty of 1951 to include this action, bullying tactics of China, and even the presence of these Chinese Coast Guards and other Chinese vessels, like for example, specifically in this Pagasa Island. Of course, it's been happening all over in the West Philippine Sea. Colonel Powell, please. Thank you.
Yeah, so I kind of go back to my response when I talked about the EDCA base at Pagasa. I think that's probably amending the MDT to include non-lethal kinds of things like water cannons, I think is unrealistic. And the reason is ultimately what you have to do is you have to convince the American people that they should be willing to go to war for water cannons. And that's a hard ask, right? I mean, America is also a democracy, and you have to get, politicians don't make those decisions lightly, not just because a lot of people could die in a war, but because they're concerned that the American people will not approve if they try to, if they appear too aggressive in that way. So I think that's probably not the way that would go. Again, I think that probably, we have to figure out other methods to make China pay a cost for the kinds of aggressive tactics that it uses. This is, I hate to sound like a broken record. This is why I keep harping on the information space. I appreciate every time we see pictures and videos of water cannons. I think every single one is helpful. And I would like to see more, and I would like to see better pictures. I would like to see long lens cameras and high quality video. I think that every Philippine Navy and Coast Guard ship should have one aboard. And you know what, to the extent that fishermen carry iPhones, I think that they should record everything too, because that is what will continue to build the case against China for its bullying tactics. In the end, China actually does care about its international reputation. And what it fears is I don't know if you've ever seen the movie A Bug's Life, the Pixar movie from back in the 90s, but there's a part where the grasshoppers are the bad guys, and they're fighting against the ants. And what they're afraid of is that all the ants will get together, right? Because the grasshoppers are big and the ants are small, but if all the ants get together, there's too many ants. Well, China in the end is afraid that all the ants will get together. And if the information continues to get out about China's bullying tactics, then all of the different countries that, China famously, their foreign minister famously told our Secretary of State back in about 2012 or 13 that actually he told it to to Singapore, who was hosting the meeting in ASEAN, that China is a big country and you are small countries. And so essentially that was their answer to their protests. So what China fears is that the small countries will get together and push back. And the way that happens is when more and more information gets out about what China is doing and the kind of price that smaller countries can expect to pay if they just continue to let China have its way and continue to be quiet every time China does something.
All right. Thank you so much, Colonel Powell, for that excellent insights. And now, we would like to read some questions. So, I have some questions from our, I would say, netizen. He's an independent journalist. Sir Sunny Fernandez, I would like to ask this question to you, Colonel. Doesn't the assignment of additional EDCA site intensify the tension between US and China and puts the Philippines in the middle of the conflict? That's his first question, Colonel Powell.
Yeah, that's a fair question, right? And this is the essence of the question about deterrence. Every military deterrent, the reason you have a deterrent, right? The point of deterrence is to make your potential adversary stop and think before they take an aggressive action, because they are concerned that the cost might be more than they want to bear, right? So a deterrent is intended to complicate that other country's strategic problem. Every deterrent carries risk, right? So the question is, when you implement a deterrent, like increasing the number of EDCA sites, right? Now, that's not just a deterrent, it's also a capacity building step. But hopefully, by increasing the contact points between the US and the Philippines, it causes China to recalculate its approach to the Philippines, right? And so And that's what a deterrent does. It says, okay, I was thinking about maybe pushing this hard, but now I have to rethink it because now this has happened. Joint patrols should be a deterrent, but there is also risk, right? If we're out there together and China decides that that's too much of a threat to them, what if instead of backing off, they push ahead, right? So every deterrent does carry with it some risk. The flip side, though, is that when you yield, when you don't deter, China always reads that as weakness and an opportunity. And so what we have seen over the years with China is when a country takes a step forward and says, no, I'm going to stand up a little bit more, the first reaction from China is usually sort of to push back. And it may even be that some of the close interactions we've seen between the Philippines and China this past week may even be related to the fact that China is unhappy about the choices that the Philippines made with the US and wants to remind the Philippines that, well, that's fine, the US comes and goes, but China is still here, right? However, what we've also seen is that the more consistently a country stands up for itself, actually China does respect that. And it does care about its international reputation, and it really only likes to push until it gets painful, and then it will often stop pushing. So, I think ultimately the expanded EDCA sites, the joint patrols, these are good for the Philippines because they're good for the Philippines, not just because they're good for the United States. Yes, there's a large geopolitical struggle going on between the two superpowers, right? But at the same time, there's the Philippines. And the Philippines' interest in leveraging its US alliance, I think, is actually good for the Philippines because it makes China stop and take notice. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Colonel Powell, for that excellent response. Now, there is another question, Colonel. There is this observation that US overreacted when it hit an alleged China spy balloon. What is your thought on this? Now, of course, what if the same thing happens in the airspace of South China Sea outside the West Philippine Sea? Will it not trigger an escalation of conflict, Colonel?
So there is a huge difference between floating a balloon over international airspace, which is legal, and floating it over someone's sovereign territory, right? The United States regularly flies reconnaissance missions in international airspace near other countries like China. China doesn't like it. Of course, they also surveil us near our, say Hawaii and Alaska and other places, and it's legal under international law. So everything was fine until the balloon started going over another country's sovereign territory with the obvious purpose of surveilling your country, right? So that really is an intolerable situation. Now, it got a lot of attention in the United States. And, could some people have overreacted? Sure. In the end, though, I think it was helpful to the United States in the way that I indicated in my earlier slide to alert us to the fact that, we need to be careful about, we need to be aware of what China is doing in trying to surveil other countries, and especially the United States in our case, right? So recently there's been a discussion about TikTok, right? Is TikTok being used by the the Chinese Communist Party to collect information and spread messages? It certainly has that capacity, and it is actually fair to say it's probably a threat. But of course, most people are like, what? I mean, it's dance videos, who cares, right? But all of a sudden, now you see a balloon fly over Montana, which has surveillance equipment all over it, and that begins to make an impression on Americans' minds and say, maybe we do need to pay a little more attention to what we're installing on our iPhones and the way that we are so we're an open society. We tend to let everybody do whatever they want, but maybe there are some bad actors who have very specific goals to exploit our open society and pry us open. So I think that in the end, the reaction was probably helpful to building national resilience. I will also say that shooting it down was a must. I mean, you can't simply let another country fly over your sovereign territory. And, I mean, clearly it didn't cost any lives. It was an unmanned balloon, but you can't let another country do that. And by the way, let's cast a counter narrative to what actually happened. What if, and this may have been China's hope, what if the US government watched the balloon fly over the entire United States, and then the Secretary of State went to Beijing and tried to have a meeting? What would be in China's mind? That what they would say is, we sent you a message and you blinked. You let it happen. We own you. That's the message. And so I think it is, in the end, even though it's a shame that we're not able to sort of begin to normalize the relationship again, you can't normalize it sort of at that cost. You need to be able to draw a line and say, no, we're not going to allow this to happen.
All right.
Colonel Power, if I may, I don't want to put you on the spot, but everybody knows very well that the shooting down of the balloon happened in the East Coast, right? But you are very well aware that the entry of that balloon came from the West,
Yes.
So, well, my real question, which is of course already questioned by most experts, why didn't they shoot down the balloon right in the beginning that it entered the U.S. territory?
I don't have sufficient understanding of what we knew and when we knew it, or the discussions that happened, to tell you exactly why that happened. I can speculate. I can speculate that, it may have been that, people saw it happening and weren't sure what to do. I do believe that there was probably some concern about the debris hitting the ground, right? Anytime a satellite comes out of orbit and hits the ground, we worry about whether it's going to hit some farmhouse and kill 3 people. And I also think probably the calculation was made that whatever they were going to learn wasn't so important that we couldn't just wait. I know that sort of it's a political discussion as to whether they should have shot it down first. But in the end, I think that actually the whole experience of having it fly over the country may turn out to be even sort of unintentionally better for us in the long run, because it's forced us to sort of have this confrontation with reality. So, but no, I mean, it is very possible that, I can imagine, in the halls of the US government, the discussion happening, what should we do? Should we do this? Well, we've got the Secretary of State is going, that'll ruin the whole trip. Well, we shouldn't do it. But, and those kinds of things could sort of wind along, and meanwhile, the balloon floats by. So, but in the end, I'm speculating. I'm not in government anymore, and I couldn't tell you why exactly it happened that way. In the end, I think, however, probably that's that the outcome was pretty good for the United States, and actually pretty terrible for China. I would be surprised if, in his heart of hearts, Xi Jinping goes to bed at night thinking that all worked out really well for him.
All right. Thank you so much, Engineer Red, for that question, and Colonel Powell. I would like to ask our participants, we have some media friends here, and also, from the military, like the Philippine Army and Philippine Air Force, and there are some government agencies represented here. And could you please raise your hand if you want to ask a question so we can promote you as panelists? I see Sir Fernan Angeles. Sir Fernan, and also ABS-CBN. I'm seeing Ma'am and from Palawan. Please feel free to ask your question, and you will be promoted as a panelist. Thank you so much. All right, Sir JR, can you please promote them who would like to be All right. Sir JJ Havinas from the Philippine Army. Okay. We can promote you, Sir Fernan. Okay, so we are promoting Mr. Fernan Angeles, and so you can ask your question to Colonel Powell. Sir JR, please assist me here,
I
please.
cannot promote po.
Okay,
Wait.
so I need to do it. Kindly hold. Okay, I am
Okay.
doing it now.
Mm,
All right, add spotlight. Okay, thank you. Okay, good morning, Sir Fernando. Kindly, I think I believe you're from the GMA, right? Saksi, right, Mr. Angeles? Can you please mute?
Yeah, good morning, good morning.
Good
Actually,
morning, sir.
I represent an independent media
Okay,
separate from that entity.
all right, thank you. Okay. Okay, sir. Do you have any question to our guest speaker, please?
Yeah. Good morning, Colonel Powell.
morning.
Given the opportunity to talk to President Marcos, what recommendations are you laying down for the Philippine government for it to be able to keep the Chinese aggression in check?
Yeah. So first of all, I would say that if I were talking to the president, I would respect the fact that he is in a very difficult position, as all governments in this part of the world are, right? It's not like you can just you can't. You're not. First of all, you're not a large country with a large military like the United States that's far away. You're a smaller country that's right in China's shadow, and you are also dependent on a lot of on China for a lot of your economic well-being. There's trade and investment and all of those things. So, I am not under the illusion that countries can simply do the same things that, say, the United States can from our position very far away and with our large military and those kinds of, and a large economy. So I would like to first say that I respect his position. Second, I think that he has made a very wise and bold choice in expanding the relationship with the United States under the EDCA and the joint patrols, and would encourage him to continue to push that forward as he has. And then finally, and I'm going to sound, this is my hobby horse and this is my project, so I apologize for repeating myself, but I would strongly encourage him to direct his government to have a policy of greater transparency. There are ways that the Philippines can fight back against this coercion by simply opening up the aperture. Something happened between the Philippine Coast Guard and the Chinese Coast Guard in the South China Sea last week, and when the Philippine ship was coming back from Pagasa and stopped for 8 hours and then went west and north. I don't know if that was a resupply mission. I don't know if the ship was stopped. I can't tell you, but something clearly happened. I think that it would be helpful for the Philippine people to see what that was, or just to know what that was. That level of transparency, I think, is actually helpful for the Philippine government because it gives them more political cover to be able to take the kinds of strong stands that they have to be able to take in order to be able to push back. So, I guess that would be my, that would be very useful if there would be, say, a daily press briefing to be able to talk about, say once a day, like you see at the Pentagon, where they talk about what has happened in the West Philippine Sea on a given day and other places, across the Philippines military and its exclusive economic zone, and let the reporters ask questions and talk directly to those reporters about the questions that they have. I think that would be tremendously useful. So I would just encourage that kind of assertive transparency on behalf of the administration. Does that help?
Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you so much for your question, Mr. Angeles, and of course, Colonel Powell. May we call, is there anybody from ABS-CBN would like to ask a question? And also from our military, we have some military officers, participants right now. And also we have Ma'am Clarina Guludon of the Palawan News, Daily News, and Petros here.
Also, I would just say, as long as I'm thinking about it, Mr. Fernan, I also applaud the president for going to Japan and for having those open channels with both Japan and Australia. I think that there's a great future for increased cooperation, not just from the US to each one of those allies, but among its allies. So Japan and Australia and the Philippines share a lot of common interests. And I think there's tremendous potential to continue to expand those relationships. And if China begins to look at the Philippines and see not just the Philippines, but see the United States and Japan and Australia standing strongly with the Philippines, I think that's a very powerful place to be. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Colonel Powell. I would like to ask, please kindly raise your hand if you have any question to Colonel Powell.
I will give the floor to anyone to ask question, but if nobody wants to ask a question, I have another question, Colonel.
Okay, so maybe Engineer Rad, can we call Sir JJ Avines of the Philippine Army? Sir, do you have any question? Kindly unmute, sir. Kindly unmute, sir. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Colonel Powell, good morning.
Good
Good
morning.
evening. Yes, sir. I'm Lieutenant Colonel J. Javines from the Philippine Army. One of the problems you pointed out earlier was the lack of information. Maybe like mentioned about specifically about taking pictures of what's really happening in the West Philippine Sea. Wouldn't it be a good start for like countries or armed forces of different countries with interest in the West Philippine Sea to just like do a joint venture and put up a satellite up there and really focus on getting information, pictures all over West Philippine Sea, sir?
So I think it's a fascinating idea. Today what we rely on primarily is what we call AIS, right? The automated information system that's on each ship. The problem with AIS is that only the large ships transmit AIS in a strong enough signal to be picked up by satellite. So the majority of the smaller ships, the majority of the ships that Celia showed in her video are not transmitting an AIS signal, or at least not one strong enough to be picked up by satellite. What I have been given to understand by people who know this better than I do is that if there were more terrestrial, so more AIS stations on land that were near to where the ships were, we'd actually see a lot more of what was happening just by their transponder returns. So, for example, if someone were to put AIS receivers on Pagasa Island, all of a sudden it would light up like a Christmas tree, because we would be able to see what all of these ships were broadcasting on their what we call the Class B AIS transponders or transmitters. So I think that there's a lot of that kind of thinking of what you just mentioned. So you're talking about having a geostationary satellite, what we call basically one that stays in the same place all the time, sponsored by the other claimant states around the South China Sea to just show the world what's happening at all times. Now, of course, as you know, it's really, really hard to get the ASEAN nations to agree on things. But I mean, if it were possible, it would be a tremendous step forward for sure. But I think that that's the kind of thinking that we're out there looking for. We're looking for, are there other ways? In fact, there's another student here at Stanford who has been around the Philippines before, and he is working on an app that goes on the phones of fishermen that they can, if they see a Chinese ship that's harassing them or just in a place that they want to be, if they're out Scarborough, the Panatag Shoal, or if they're somewhere else at their fishing grounds and they see a Chinese ship is there, they can take out their phone, they can take a picture of it, they can locate it, it has a GPS, they can put a little report in and send it off, and all of a sudden this goes into the big database that all of these companies are using to keep track of everything. So I think we are on the cusp of an information revolution as far as what can be seen and known about the entire South China Sea and the maritime commons. And it's that kind of thinking and that kind of out of the box thinking, I think, that's really needed. So I commend you for your question.
Can I have one more question, sir?
Sure.
Go ahead.
As a retired military yourself, and we've seen the response. And this is my personal takes on the response of our armed forces with regards to our situation in the West Philippine Sea. Of course, we're taking it on a what they call a calibrated response for the Air Force and the Navy. Because of this, maybe just to avoid a confrontation and maybe altercation with like Navy ships of the China, or maybe the Coast Guard and the Coast Guard of China further, in order to deconflict the situation. But as a retired military yourself, sir, what do you think would the Navy and the Air Force, the Philippine Air Force, the Philippines would do in order to increase the awareness, no? Maybe to take because the problem really here is like we don't have really the real picture of what's really happening in the West Philippines. Maybe because as I've said earlier, there is this problem on maybe the release of information, no, from the Air Force and maybe the Navy. But as a retired military, so my question is, what do you suggest for the Navy and the Air Force to do more? Maybe capability development, or maybe strategy to like maybe we could be able to gather more information in the West Philippine Sea and take this information to the outside world.
Yeah, I think so. When you're talking about information going to the outside world, that begins at the leadership and policy level. Somebody, frankly, in the Philippine government has to decide that it's in the Philippines' interest to open the aperture and allow more information out, right? And by having a strategy that says we need to sort of aggressively push information out rather than do what comes naturally to all governments, which is to hold information, right? My government is not different. Now we may be in different places, but every government, every bureaucracy on the world is inclined to protect information first and foremost, because you're afraid that the bad thing might happen if I let it out, right? So one of the obvious ones that the Philippines faces is, if we allow information out, will China punish us? Will it escalate the situation with China? Will they put another embargo on our bananas like they did in 2013? Will they, will these bad things happen if we allow information out? The thing is that China tends to react the first time that you do something that's unusual for you. So when it sees you doing something unusual for you, it will probably react. But as you let them know that you're not going to stop, that you're going to keep doing this because this is your new policy, we're just going to do it and you're not going to change our minds, eventually they adjust, right? They realize that this is not working for them and they have to find a new normal for them. So, it's a hard thing for a government to do, because the instant that you do it and there's some response from China, people will point at you and say, see, everything was fine, and now this happened. And what you have to know in your heart of hearts is everything's not fine, right? The problem is that if we keep doing what we're doing, we're just losing in slow motion. We have to do something to turn it around, and that can begin in the sphere of information. You're not shooting at them. You're not trying to run them over. What you're doing is just putting out there what is true. And if you come out and you say, we're having a policy of increased transparency, every every one of our ships will have, you know, these capabilities. At the end, we'll come out and we will have a press conference where we will talk about what happened on this latest mission. It will show some pictures if, you know, if something happened. Maybe if nothing happened, you show pictures of beautiful skies and happy fishermen, right? But if something did happen, then you show those pictures and you just say that's the way we do it. And if China will eventually adjust, and that's what deterrence looks like.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much,
If
Sir JJ.
if I may comment.
Happiness. And
Yeah.
hello, is somebody talking?
Dr. Celia, yeah, if I may comment about that amazing suggestion of Mr. J, yeah, that could have been an ideal situation where we have different nations collaborated, surveillance, put it that way. But I still have a problem with the ASEAN nations, which of course also claimants to the territories in the South China Sea, like Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Brunei, and Taiwan, that even the code of conduct in the South China Sea, they cannot agree on to have established, So I think we have a long ways to talk in regards to collaborated surveillance among countries in the ASEAN as well. So, yeah, my comment only. If you agree, Colonel.
What I will say is, since I am a pessimist when it comes to the code of conduct, I think that it will be very, very difficult for China to agree to anything that will be acceptable to the other claimant nations, because ultimately its claims and its objectives are contrary to those other nations. So I think that if you were to come up with a very weak code of conduct, which is what everybody would eventually agree to, China would use it against you and say, well, the UN Convention of the Law of the Sea no longer applies because we have this new code of conduct that gives us what we want. So I am on record as being a pessimist on the code of conduct. I'm sure there's value in continuing the conversations, but I am not an optimist.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so
Colonel.
much for your comment, Engineer Red, and of course, Colonel Powell. May we call on Colonel Alfred Sarmiento of the Philippine Air Force, sir? Would you like to ask a question? Please, thank you. Colonel Sarmiento. Okay, while waiting for him, I think he's not turning his video. And we have also a guest here, actually, Bill Comley. Bill from is a former Department of Defense, of course, and the State Department.
Yes, indeed. Bill and I
Officer.
actually worked together in Hanoi for a little while.
Oh yeah, it's good that you know Bill. Okay, you know each other. Okay, Bill, please let me promote you. So if you have some question. All right, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much once again, Celia, for the invitation to join in with one of your webinars here. They're always very, very useful and informative for me. And Ray, thanks once again. It's great to see you again. It's been quite a while, but I'm glad you're doing well and having a great time down there at Stanford. This was an extremely useful presentation and project that you're working on. And I guess one comment I'd like to make is I think going back to Colonel Powell's comment about all the ants ganging up and getting together, I think that's a very useful example to keep in mind. And there's a couple of things going on. Number one, I think it's great that the Philippines has taken the leadership position once again in terms of establishing their ownership over their own exclusive economic zone in accordance with all the international law. That's the way it should be. But I think it's good that we're starting to see some other ASEAN countries doing similar things. And one of the things I think that's really important is we've talked a little bit about territorial disputes and things like that. And I think last year we saw Vietnam and Indonesia finally resolve their maritime boundary, which I think is incredibly important. We haven't seen an advance like that in quite some time. And Indonesia continues to move forward now with defending its territory in the Natuna Sea, and even making movements towards establishing some oil and gas drilling operations out there. So it's going to be really fascinating to see how that progresses. But I think it's great that the other ASEAN countries are starting to stand up to China as well, just like Colonel Powell was talking about, deterrence and drawing your red line and giving China an opportunity to back down again. And the other thing I was interested in, and I've kind of lost track of what's going on with the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum. I don't know if the Philippine Coast Guard was also taking a leadership role in that, but I haven't seen anything in the media for a while. I think that would be another very useful effort, having an ASEAN Coast Guard Forum. That would be because we've already got some stuff going at the tactical level, but at the the policy level within ASEAN as well. So if anybody has any information on that, I'd be very happy to know it. Thank you, Celia.
Thank you so much, Bill. Okay, Colonel Ray.
Oh, I was just going to say, on the ASEAN Coast Guard Forum, I'm afraid that's outside of my base of knowledge. I do know that there is a new Coast Guard security cooperation fellow who's working out of Kuala Lumpur, but he's working across several of the ASEAN nations, working on kind of a broad approach to Coast Guard activities. So, perhaps that's a step in the right direction. I'm talking about the U.S. Coast Guard.
Yeah, thanks very much for that.
All right. Thank you so much. Some more, have any more questions? Bill?
No, that's it for now, Celia. Thank you very much. I'm really enjoying listening to the other participants' questions, particularly those any journalists that are still on the network. Give them an opportunity to get some questions in.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bill, and of course, Colonel Powell. So
Yeah.
maybe,
Thank you, Celia.
yeah. Thank you so much. Now maybe call the other media before we are almost I would say almost 12 noon. Can we ask the Palawan News if you would like to ask a question? Ma'am Clarina Guludan of Palawan Daily News, and also Ma'am Fe Tudla of the ABS-CBN. Please kindly raise your hand if you want to ask questions, please. Thank you. And for others, please raise your hand if you still want to ask question to Colonel Powell. So Jar, can you please look? I cannot see on my end if they're raising their hand.
There's a question here from Miss Melanie. Okay, can I just read it, Doctora?
Okay, yes,
Okay.
please. Yeah.
Go
The
ahead.
question.
Miss Melanie Acebuque, is that?
Yes, yes.
Is she
She's-
there? Okay.
Or maybe she
Kindly hold.
can. She can just ask her. Maybe she can
It's
just.
okay.
ask
You
her.
can ask her question. Now.
Okay. She said Colonel Powell provided pictures of locations of Chinese vessels in the West Philippine Sea. Would it not be a good idea for our Navy to collaborate with Colonel Powell so that with those satellite pictures we can prepare and go block the Chinese vessels before they enter our economic zone. Just my opinion, hoping our Philippine Navy to be more proactive. That's it. That's the question.
So thanks for the question. I think two things about that. One is that so the Philippine Navy actually has a lot more resources that it can put to this, so the amount of resources that I'm able to get through these commercial means are not, they probably have better pictures than I do, right? Most governments, for example, the Philippine Coast Guard probably has access to Sea Vision, which is a U.S. developed system that it shares with a lot of its partners and allies. And so, and that's, as I understand it, is a very capable system that gives them excellent visibility into the West Philippine Sea. So I don't assume that they know less than I do. I assume that they know more than I do, because they have the access to these very expensive government-owned systems and government-controlled systems. And that's as it should be, right? I mean, you wouldn't expect anything else. However, so that's one thing. Second is defending the Philippines' entire exclusive economic zone against China is very difficult because China already has two major ports and bases in the Philippines exclusive economic zone. Mischief Reef and Subi Reef already exist, and Subi Reef already exist in the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines. So, keeping China out of the Philippines exclusive economic zone, that's sort of like, closing the door after the cow's already out of the barn, right? We're not at that point right now. Right now, China's Coast Guard and Maritime and Militia exist in the Philippines exclusive economic zone, and they are not going to be easy to dislodge. So we're sort of trying to figure out how do we manage them within this space. And of course, what you're trying to do is figure out how do you minimize their impact on the Philippines' ability to get to its own resources, mostly fish and oil and gas, right? So that's kind of where the problem is now. And so we're a long way from being able to get China out of the EEZ. Finally, I would say that I had something and I've just forgotten it. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you for that answer, Colonel Powell.
Colonel, if I may comment again, okay, made mention about, bringing in the cow already inside our pens. Okay, that's the reason why in the beginning I asked about the bases being stationed in one of our, major islands as well, which is in this case Pagasa, and I think it's time for us to revisit our definition of that island, because if we have to go back to the 2016 tribunal that was awarded to us, that for the same reason why Scarborough was, basically, leave it as is, where China and the Philippines could basically share the wealth of what we have in the Scarborough, but not for Pagasa. You made mention about sustainability of an island. Let's not forget Pagasa Island is basically a natural island. The EEZ, the meaning of EEZ could be, could qualify to an island just like Pagasa. In this case, we have the civilian population, the only one in this Spratlys group, of course, as you know. So having said that, I still think that, the strategy that we had before, the United States strategy of the South China Sea, where basically I could say you allowed China to build their own artificial islands, and we, so us, the Philippine government, but this time maybe we have to revisit that now, and then we have to establish our own and be more aggressive and assertive in putting up our bases, which of course I recommend to be in Pag-asa Island. What do you think about that? And again, I'd like to discuss that because to your definition, essentially, in my opinion, right now, if we have to revisit the UNCLOS and the definition of EEZ, basically Pag-asa Island qualifies.
So I see, I mean, it would obviously would take somebody to file a new case with the arbitral tribunal to try to get that changed. And I honestly would not see that as a likely outcome. I don't think that the arbitral tribunal went through every single island feature in the Spratly Archipelago and, gave its reasoning for what it considered to be an island under its definition. And so, when the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea considers features, you have things that they're, sort of anything that sticks above the water at any time, right? So you have low tide elevations, which are only above water at low tide. You have things that are above water at all times, which are called rocks. And under the UN's definition, Pag-asa is a rock. Just like a lot of other things in the West Philippine Sea are rocks, and the whole South China Sea. And then at the highest level is an island. And again, the difference between a rock under their definition and an island is the ability to sustain life without outside help. And again, I don't know. I'm not the person who makes those decisions. Is it possible that they punted and they said, this is too hard, we don't want to, have the the responsibility to say that these islands exist and all have their EEZs in the middle of this very contested place? I don't know. I would hesitate to say, but I would also want to emphasize that on the whole, the arbitral tribunal ruling was an overwhelming victory for the Philippines, and so even though I think there's nothing wrong, by the way, with the Philippines basing its own military assets at Pag-asa. That's other countries do that. There's nothing that says you can't. I just think that if your expectation is that it could become an EDCA site, I don't see that as something that's within the realm of possibility right now. I'm just being realistic.
Yeah, I might have to
Thank you
ask
so much.
Justice Carpy about that, because while during the discussion, I tried to research more about the definition of an island. In this case, Pag-asa is a natural island. It's not a rock. Okay. In this case, I thought, I didn't see in the definition of the EEZ that that makes the Pag-asa Island is a rock. I'm not sure about that, so I think we have to revisit that issue, right now.
Well, certainly Justice Carpio knows everything that can be known on this topic. He is a very, very smart man.
Well, actually, I would like to add that, of course, the Pag-asa Islands is a barangay or a village in the Kalayaan municipality. And of course, the Kalayaan municipality was established under President Marcos Sr. to be a municipality. And that time, all the military were there. It was only in 2001 when it was inhabited by the civilians. So that's all I can say. So definitely, Pag-asa Island or Tito Island and the municipality of Kalayaan is actually in Pag-asa Island because that's the only inhabited island of the Kalayaan Island group. Of course, we have other islands there, the Patag Island, Lawak Island, etc., where all our military troops are posted over there. So, but there are no civilians. All right. So, anyway, again, of course, Colonel Ray Powell, I would like to ask first before we will be going to our next segment of our event. Thank you so much for all those excellent responses and insights, facts, and data that you have shared to us, and also, of course, to our panelists and our panelists and the Zoom participants. Kindly hold. Yeah. I think Yusek Eduardo Manyalak is trying to raise his hand. So kindly hold. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Let us add the spotlight to Yusek Manyalak. All right. Good afternoon. Yusek Eduardo Manyalak is the former Undersecretary of the Department of Energy and a former president of the Philippine National Oil Company, or PNOC, in the Republic of the Philippines. Yes, sir. Yusek
Yes, good,
Manyala, please.
good,
Okay,
good
thank
morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are.
Good evening,
Yes,
Sir
the
Manyala.
very interesting exchange of ideas, thoughts, and knowledge, information. I got something new today. So let me ask Colonel Powell one question. You are correct when we say in the EEZ, I think the resource that we're both looking for, China and us and the other ASEAN countries, are the potential possible oil and gas deposits, plus the marine resources in the area. Now I will talk about the oil resources. Based on your explanation of where the EEZ and the fact that Pag-asa Island is not an island but just a rock which does not generate its own EEZ. What I'm thinking, my question is, how then would we explore for oil and gas? How would the Philippines explore for oil and gas when somebody, China for that matter, is going to give us trouble?
Yes.
You know, if I bring a rig over there, no, how would that play out? You know, of course we don't, because the only way I can think of is I invite American companies to partner with our Philippine National Oil Company. We drill there, and the U.S. military protects us. But you know, maybe that will not work.
Yeah.
So but my bottom line is, you're correct. I'm only after to be able to make use of any oil and gas resources in the area. So how do I do that now with China bothering me? You know, and
You
I
have
don't
asked a very, very big and important question. And of course, you know, the place that everybody is talking about is Reed Bank, which is clearly in the Philippines EEZ, and which was the topic, of course, of some discussions about joint development. And in the end, of course, it was decided that joint development under the terms that China offered was unconstitutional because it violated Philippine sovereignty. And of course, you know, one of the reasons that China offers these terms is because it knows that its terms violate Philippine sovereignty. And that way, if they get the Philippines to agree to it, then they have one more, you know, leg up in, you know, sort of asserting their claim.
Right.
I think that this is probably one of those areas. You know, we have a very well developed military to military relationship now, and honestly, it's been one of the most important things for getting us through some of the harder years that we've had recently. I think that this is one of those government to government discussions that needs to be elevated. And, you know, if this would be one of those things that I think probably needs to be handled really almost at the head of state level to ask the question, how are we going to do this, right? The gas fields at Malampaya are not inexhaustible. And and they're, as much as we would love to see renewable energy everywhere, we're not there. We're not at the point where that's going to happen. It's not, I mean, you know, certainly in the future, but not now, and not in the next 5 years, and not in the next 10 years, you know, at the scale that you would need to run an entire economy for a country the size of the Philippines. So realistically, you know, you do need access to those resources. And I think that that is one of those things that I think probably needs to be elevated to one of the very top of your discussions, maybe not just with the United States, but also even with Japan and other countries, to talk about, you know, what is, you know, maybe a consortium, you know, the US, Japan, the Philippines, talking about how to get at those resources. And once you kind of get there and you enter it in. Now, historically, of course, the U.S. has avoided mixing business and security, right? So we say, well, the companies do what companies do, and the security, military does what the military does. Those two things don't come together because we don't do industrial policy. But these are not ordinary circumstances. And I had very similar discussions, by the way, when I was in Vietnam, and they would say, why don't you get Exxon to come back here and develop our resources, because the Chinese keep harassing the boats, and now the Spanish aren't coming back, and now the other countries aren't coming back. I think it is one of those things that probably needs to be elevated to the very top of the bilateral agenda.
Correct. Thank you for a
Yes,
very straight answer. That's what I've been I expected.
Well, it's so much easier for me now that I'm out of government.
I wish I would have heard something different, more doable. But yes, I agree. I understand. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Thank you so much, Yusek Manyala and Colonel Powell. Okay, we can entertain one more question. Sir JR, can you please look if there's someone raising their hand?
Yeah, there's a question from Mr. Alfred Sarmiento. Maybe he can.
Okay. So
can
he's
just say-
Colonel Sarmiento.
Colonel
Colonel,
Sarmiento.
would you like to? We can promote Colonel. Maybe would you like to ask that question,
Yeah.
Colonel?
I think he can.
Colonel
I can.
Alfred Sarmiento from the Philippine Air Force, sir. All right. So I will. We can promote him.
Yeah, he's there already. Doctora.
All right.
Already.
go
All
first.
right. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes.
My
Good
apologies
afternoon, Colonel Sarmiento. All right. Thank you.
to the members, to the attendees. Good afternoon. So my apologies, I wasn't able to ask my question earlier. So this one is only a personal question and not related to the Philippine Air Force. So Colonel Powell, does your organization try to publish all your data to the Chinese media or mainland China to educate and inform the local Chinese people what CCP and the PRC is still doing in the South China Sea and the West Philippine Sea and other nations? Thank you.
That is one of the hardest things that is one of the hardest missions on earth, frankly. It is really, really hard to penetrate what we call the Great Firewall of China. There is nothing that communist leaders fear more than their own people. And China has elevated and mastered their own internal security state to such a degree that it is extremely hard to get information in from the outside. We've had, there have been a lot of people who've studied that problem and come away discouraged that they haven't been able to figure out how to penetrate that society. And I would say, frankly, even if you could, it may be that at this point, generations of Chinese citizens have grown up not only with a single narrative that every Chinese citizen who grows up and goes through school knows that the 9-dash line belongs to China, period, dot, and everyone else who's inside it is in Chinese territory. It would be very hard to sort of break into that and change a lot of minds, even if you could break into it. I know that, in talking to Justice Carpio, he would love to be able to do that. Because he has an excellent presentation that is, in my mind, irrefutable, but it is utterly contrary to everything that people who grow up in China know, because they learn from a very young age. So it's just a really, really hard problem. And I'm not sure that we're going to see an answer unless things change drastically. So educating the Chinese people, I guess the one thing that I would say is here at Stanford, there are a lot of Chinese students, and they are hearing things that are not the party line. I don't think that there are enough of them in foreign universities to change what Chinese society knows. And I guess as an example, I would give you the example of Russia. Russia does not have a great firewall. They have access to outside information. And yet, if you ask your average Russian citizen, if the war in Ukraine is just, most of them would say sure. So even though information gets in, it's hard to penetrate a society that has learned one thing their whole lives. And in this case, sort of the idea that Ukraine belongs to Russia. So it's, it is awfully hard to do sort of counter narrative within another country, especially one as sophisticated in its internal messaging as China. Now, does that mean it will never happen? No, but it takes a lot. It takes a lot for a society to get to the point. The Soviet Union got to the point where the people in Russia no longer believed what they were hearing, but they suffered greatly. Before they got to that point, they suffered great poverty and famine in some cases, and there was a lot of suffering before they got to the point where they didn't see the point in all of the things that were happening anymore. So it takes a long time, and China has had a very long period of prosperity, and so most Chinese citizens don't really have a reason to question what they've been told all these years. And I think that they're probably coming to sort of a crest, right? They're having debt problems, they're having demographic problems, now they're having growth problems, but that doesn't mean that's going to happen. That house of cards doesn't come down tomorrow. It's going to be a very long time before, what you're really hoping, I think, is that the elites in China eventually are able to sort of turn it to a less radical expansionist path. I think that's kind of what you're hoping. So I hope that helps.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you so much, Colonel Sarmiento, and of course, Colonel Ray Powell. Are there any more questions? Can you please look, Sir JR, if somebody is raising their hand, so we're kind of like wrapping up. Sorry, Colonel Powell, I think it's, we passed the the time, but it's kind of like very interesting. So and I'm glad there are more questions coming out, of course, from the military and from our Zoom participants. All right, so if there are no more questions, may we call now again Captain Caruso Mario Antonio Tagal, the Director of the Membership of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea. Captain, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Lamkin. And may I have the slides for the membership, Mr. Sir JR? All right. And again, who would like to be a member of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea? Who are eligible to join? And any Filipino or of Filipino descent, ages 6 to 40 for the youth sector, and minors 6 to 17 years old will require parental or guardian permission or consent. Membership is also open to non-Filipinos who believe in the mission and goals of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea. Membership forms can be filled up at the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea website at www.nymwps.net, or simply send your name, address, phone number, resume or short bio and pictures, and email it at this address, info@nymwps.net. And thank you very much. Hope to see you in our movement.
Thank you very much, Captain Tagal. And for the social media platforms of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea, you can see at the screen, the FB page is at NYMWPS, where we are live right now. The FB page of the NYMWPS. We have a YouTube channel, I am NYMWPS, the Twitter, NYMWPS_official, And our website is www.nymwps.net. And of course, it was mentioned earlier, our email address is info@nymwps.net. Now, of course, we would like to acknowledge on behalf of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea, we would like to extend our sincerest appreciation and heartfelt gratitude to our great and excellent guest speaker for tonight, Colonel Raymond Powell. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much, Colonel.
Thank you so much,
for the very informative,
Colonel.
excellent presentation, the facts and data, and excellent insights. So, would you like to say some few words before I will continue with the acknowledgement of other participants? Colonel, please.
Just to remind you that what you're doing is so important, that when we talk about an engaged public being the key to winning the narrative war, that's where you come in. And what you're doing is so important, and I'm a huge fan and a huge admirer. And if what we are doing helps in any way, then I will have considered our efforts a success. So thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Colonel Powell, for that very kind words, and of course, for
Thank you,
the
Colonel.
National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea, we are very thankful to you, and we will just continue collaborating with you. Maraming salamat. All right, and of course, we extend our appreciation and thanks to our guests. We have seen our guests. We have Bill Comey, who asked a question from a former employee of officer of the U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. Department of State. And we have, of course, from the Philippine Army, Sir Jay Habines. We have some representative from the Department of Education, and from TESDA, we have from University of Batangas, and we have from Mr. Joy Yasay, Martin Joy Yasay from the Integrated Bar of the Philippines. Thank you so much for joining us. And of course, Colonel Alfred Sarmiento from the Philippine Air Force. We have someone from the Independent Fisheries Resource Management Consultant, Miss Sandy, or Mr. Sandy, Ma'am Clarina Guludan of the Palawan Daily News and Petrosphere Incorporated, Ma'am Fe Tudla of the ABS-CBN. We have Marius Panalon of the MPA 612. Sir Ramon Monching de Leon is also our National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea member. Mr. Christopher Orongan from the Institute for Policy, Strategy and Development Studies Incorporated. And we would like to thank also Sir Sunny Fernandez, NYMWPS, and an independent journalist, and the National Union of Journalists of the Philippines, Ma'am Ellen Tordesillas of Vera Files. We have also, of course, Mr. Fernan Angles, an independent journalist who asked the questions earlier. And to all our media friends, I do apologize if I forgot to mention all your names who are here. And to our diplomats, I will not mention their names anymore. And to those who are watching at the FB Live of our webinar, and of course, to our great panelists, Miss Via Tagal, Sir JR, maybe we can spotlight our panelists now. Sir Gerard Estelia for his excellent technical support, and our chairperson of the Malaysia chapter, and Captain Caruso Tagal, Engineer Rad Barrientos. Of course, we would like to thank Yusek Eduardo V. Manala, a former DOE Undersecretary, and also a consultant advisor and a lifetime member of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea. Captain Tagal, don't see him. And to my husband, Professor Ron Lamkin, he's a lifetime member, advisor, and consultant of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea, and my co-producer of this West Philippine Sea Cuts. Thank you very much. Ma'am Elinol Balyaran, our Deputy Social Media Director and NYMWPS South Korea County Chairperson. And I'm not sure if if I have missed someone. My apology if I missed someone, of course. And to all members of the National Youth Movement for the West Philippine Sea, legal counsels, advisor, consultants, supporters, maraming salamat po. Let's include now everyone. I will make this as a gallery, of course. Oh, before we end this one, we would like to call on Engineer Rad Barrientos for his closing remarks. Maraming salamat po for joining us. Thank you very much. Okay, Engineer Rad.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Celia. We'll come to the point now that, first of all, I'd like to thank Colonel Raymond Powell for that amazing and great resource and great source of data and informations that we gathered today. With that, we come to think that it's a emergency or high time now that us in the Philippines. I'm glad that we have everybody here in all sectors of our life in the Philippines, from non-government agencies and media, all the Filipinos, So I'm calling your attention now in regards to what Colonel Powell have revealed to us, that it's about high time that we got to do something in regards to what's going on in the West Philippine Sea. And of course, everybody knows that the Philippines is the only Christian nation in Asia. So I'd like to quote the Bible in regards to this issue about what's going on in the West Philippine Sea. If I may, I'd like to open 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 8. It says that be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And also I have Luke 21, verse 36. But stay awake at all times, praying that you may have strength to escape all these things that you are going to take place and to stand before the Son of Man. Having said that, again, I'd like to encourage everyone to what Colonel Powell has, recommended to us, that what's going on in the West Philippine Sea must be collaborated by every, perhaps ASEAN nation, but more importantly by every Filipinos, that we together, will reveal what is really going on in the South China Sea, or what we call the West Philippine Sea. So again, thank you so much for attending this webinar, because for me, for us, I think this is an eye-opener. Maraming salamat po sa inyong lahat. Mabuhay kayong lahat. And thank you so much, Colonel Powell.
All right. Thank you so much. Very much. All right. So before we end this one, let's all right. Thank you so much for that excellent closing remarks, Engineer Rad. And we are now on the gallery. So before we end this one, let's have a photo gallery. All right, Sir JR, please. Okay, kindly turn on your video so we can, and smile, so we can have a photo, a group photo. And of course,
1,
again,
2, 3.
3.
There. Okay na po, Doktora.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you
you.
so much. And again, let's give a round of applause to Colonel Ray Powell. Thank you very much. Mabuhay po kayo. Colonel, thank you. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you,
So
Colonel.
now,
Thank you very much, Colonel Ray. Let's go,
Thank
Air
you.
Force.
Air Force.
all right.
All the way.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much. So now,
Thank you so much.
for the next season, we are going to announce later when will be the next season. All right. So now, this concludes the season 3 and episode 3 of the West Philippine Sea Catch. And this is Dr. Celia Lamkin, broadcasting live from Guam, USA. Maraming salamat. Thank you very much, and God bless us all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Doktora.
Thank you.
Everybody.